Welcome to another edition of the A-List Podcast. This is your host, Sherrod Blakely, and today we have quite the treat, my friends. We have our good friend Sam Amick with The Athletic, senior NBA writer. And Sam, we're just gonna, this is a little bit different for our audience because they're used to Sherrod and my co-host Kwani, but she is having some flight issues, which
Okay.
to me is like great because that means more time for me to talk and flatten my gums. So Kwani's loss is my gain, and your arrival is definitely the gain for our audience. And Sam, we're just going to jump right into it and just start talking about the trade deadline. And the question on the minds of Celtics fans certainly is: Danny going to do a deal this year?
Sherrod, first of all, thank you for having me. I haven't seen you in a minute. I hope you're holding up okay, brother. You look good. And apologies to, I didn't know we were going viewing audience today. This is the trade deadline week grunge special, so I'm coming casual with it. You're rocking the cues. I feel like I should shout out the TNT folks who gave me the free swag here that I'm showcasing. But listen, we all know your audience more than any other kind of fan base. That the Danny, is he going to do it? Is he not? Game is something that has kind of taken on a life of its own. And it's not just in Boston. Now it's around the NBA with other teams even kind of shrugging and at times rolling their eyes going, oh, okay, the Celtics have, 15 more guys that they're going to go add. Like always, we'll see. Now, if you would have caught me last night, I was really starting to think that this Aaron Gordon thing was going to heat up today and who knows, maybe even go down today. And I would still put him at the front of the line in terms of, what seems most possible. I've written about the Harrison Barnes stuff. That doesn't seem real probable. The Kings are holding on to him. I was told that the Celtics are somewhat out on the John Collins pursuit, that there's some concern about, the fact that he's going to cost a lot of money this offseason. So Gordon has been my focus. And I would say this, like the one change, and I'm curious to get your read on this, in terms of Danny and the Celtics kind of the mood that they normally have this time of year is you're kind of sensing, at least from other teams, that the level of motivation and the pressure that's been applied to the situation is such that maybe it does finally get it over the finish line, because 500 team roughly that is used to being in the conference finals with, now young guys who are used to being on all-star teams and they want to win, and a lot of angst and a lot of stress and pressure that I do think is kind of, working its way up into the front office. And I'm dying to see what Danny does.
Yeah, it's a little bit different this year, Sam, because in the past, when the trade deadline came up, the Celtics record-wise were still among the top tier teams in the East. And so there was less a sense of we need to make a change so we can get better, as opposed to we need to make a change to maybe get over the hump, which Danny then says, nah, we're good with our guys we got. This year, 500 team, it's hard to imagine that Thursday at 3:01 p.m. that the Boston Celtics will look identical then as they do now. I just think that there is greater motivation for Danny to get a deal done. He has a ginormous, trade chip with that player exception with the Gordon Hayward sign and trade with Charlotte to play with. Plus, he's got the minor ones. He got like another $5 million exception for Enes Kanter, $2.6 million for Vincent Poirier. So he's got some multi-level options that he can use and not have a significant impact on this roster. But with the trade player exception, as you know, they're hard capped out. So even though it's worth $28.5 million, they can't use all that money out there. And John Collins on many levels would make sense. But Aaron Gordon, when you look at the type of players that Danny is building as part of his core, Aaron Gordon kind of fits the profile in many respects. And I know you and Jared Weiss, you guys, as you mentioned, you guys wrote about that for The Athletic. And I'm just curious, in your reporting, what are the kind of assets that teams, or specifically the Orlando Magic, are looking for if they're going to part ways with Aaron Gordon, who from everything I've heard, their asking price is pretty steep?
It is steep. And listen, Matt Moore at the Action Network put out a story yesterday about multiple first-round picks being on the table from Boston. That's my understanding as well. And it seems like the one part that is still in flux, potentially, as far as the possible framework, is the Marcus Smart, inclusion or lack of inclusion. And that ties into what, Sherrod, you're talking about with the trade exception and the size of it and where they're at with the hard cap, where, one way around that and to use, almost all of that exception is to send a guy like Marcus out, with his salary. Now, Celtics fans hear that. You got a lot of affection for Marcus. Yeah. I wish I could credit this tweet. I just saw a tweet from a media person that said something like, trading any deal that includes Marcus Smart going out and Aaron Gordon coming in, is grounds for relocation of the Celtics. So, this is a hot topic. And I wonder though, and you're a lot closer to it than I am. I love Marcus as a player and enjoy the hell out of him as a person, from a media standpoint, but there's a lot of history there and he runs really hot and his intensity has been a real, part of their fabric. But you do occasionally hear noise that, maybe they're looking to turn a new page. And that's where other teams are getting excited because Marcus has value on the market and he's the kind of guy that can, fit into a lot of elite cultures. But, for the Magic, you're talking about those picks, that's what they're looking at. And if I had to guess, I think there's probably a lot of haggling going on in real time about the protections on the picks. Is it going to be 2 straight firsts? Is it going to be a first and a second? And the idea that Boston was pursuing and is still believed to be pursuing not only Aaron, but Evan Fournier in this situation as well is big because it's obviously that would require, I think, Marcus going out. And if you talk about kind of reputation and personality, the fans are going to look at that and go, wait a minute, like Marcus Smart and what he stands for. And then Evan Fournier, who just floats with the wind and plays great one day, not so great the next day. And he's not going to get into anybody's backside competitively. So I'm dying to see what happens. Denver's still in the mix 100%. The difference with Denver is kind of fascinating because you talk about the past years with Boston and Danny's normal kind of mood. That's very much how Denver is right now. They have the luxury of being 25-17 and feeling like we got an MVP candidate, we have an all-star caliber wing, and then we have a young rising star that they think he is a budding superstar. So they feel like they got a trio. And then, can they add a guy like Aaron, who really, for as much focus as we talk about Aaron's offensive side way too much. Aaron's defense has everything to do with why he's got a market here, because the Nuggets look at it as Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, Luka Doncic, like they need another body like Aaron to go help them on that side. So I think it's those two teams. And if a move's going to happen, I think it'll be one of the two.
Yeah. And the other thing about Aaron Gordon that I think, people don't really think about or talk about is you look at the kind of personnel that he has been surrounded by in Orlando, and that's not conducive to a guy being a good scorer, particularly when you're talking about someone who has to rely on others to get him the ball, to recognize where he can be effective. He really hasn't had a top tier point guard that he's played with, since he's been down there. And I'm just curious what he would look like with a team that had, frankly, better talent, more guys who understand the importance of ball movement and facilitation and things of that nature. He's an interesting prospect. No, there's no question about it. But when I look at the Celtics team, Marcus Smart, we've talked about, and the guy that is starting to get more talk is Mr. Robert Williams III. And just what are some of the things you're hearing about him? And are there some other guys on this Celtics roster besides the two J's that teams are kind of excited and interested, at least to kind of poke the bear and see if there's something there?
Honestly, to me, it would be Robert, and to a lesser degree, Peyton, just because shooting being what it is in this league, and he's had some pretty good moments in his rookie year, but it's not a lot. Like that's the thing that I learned through the course of the past few weeks and trying to track some of the Celtics stuff was that, like, if you go back to the Barnes situation, I had written a whole thing that admittedly was very much skewed like from the Celtics side and their perspective. And then it was like on the back end, even though ironically I live, as you know, near Sacramento,
right?
Then I kind of doubled back and it was like, wait a minute, hold the phones. The Kings are not as eager to get rid of Harrison as we thought. And not only that, my understanding is they're not, really all that interested in any of the Celtics young pieces in terms of like, the type of guy that's going to move the needle for them. And I think that's where Danny's in a tricky spot because, once you get past the picks, then, you're kind of having to do a sales job with some of these young guys. But Robert for sure has put himself in a spot where, his reputation's gotten better, the respect is coming, and there's going to be a market there. And anytime you got a guy with multiple years left on a rookie deal and that kind of controlled cost with actual production, that's huge because as Sherrod, it's like the way the CBA is built now, you got 70 to 80% of the money going to the superstars on every single team. And then you got to get real creative around the edges. And if you can have any kind of impact player on a low number like that, that's a really, really big deal.
One of the things that we like to do, Sam, around here is we like to play games. And I got a game for you. And the game is called Pick and Roll. Now, here are the rules. You'll be given two options. You pick one of them and explain why you are rolling with that pick. Okay? Now,
got you.
Neither of these scenarios can be done straight up. We know that. But a deal centered around Rob Williams for Atlanta's John Collins or a deal centered around Marcus Smart for, let's say, Lonzo Ball. Which deal are you doing if you're the Boston Celtics?
If I am Danny Ainge and I got Mike Zarin over in the shadows over here, I'm going to go for the Marcus Smart Lonzo Ball deal. And I already kind of hinted at why. I could be wrong, but I do right now feel like there's noise and smoke around Marcus that in terms of like taking a pulse on the dynamic between a player and an organization, I feel like it's going towards that direction of him being a guy that eventually will be on the way out. But more importantly, we just hit on Robert Williams and everything that comes with that kind of impact at a low number. To go get John Collins, he's a fantastic player, but you're going to have a similar problem to what the Hawks are facing right now, where he turned down a $90 million extension last offseason and is widely known to see himself as a max player. So then it becomes, we like John Collins, but do we like him at that kind of a number? Right. And then the question becomes, what's your ceiling? And are you going to lock yourself into a situation where you're maybe a second round playoff team every year, but that's as far as you're going to go? With Lonzo, now the numbers are not that drastically different, but my understanding is that, as he goes into, he's got 1 year left on his rookie year, that he's looking, he could be extended this offseason, like $20 million a year roughly is kind of what his people are putting out there in terms of cost. That's not a terrible number. You know what I mean? Like, it's a little high because Lonzo's had a lot of down moments in his young career, but the defensive playmaking, the improved shooting, and the ability to play off the ball and play, I think, well with guys like Jalen and Jason, I think that could be good. And you have a really versatile perimeter attack and then just keep trying to find a way to fortify that front court, hold on to a guy like Robert Williams. So I am making that pick or the roll, whichever one you want me to do, Sherrod, but that's my trade.
Well, full disclosure, I absolutely love Marcus Smart to death. I have loved him going all the way back to when he was, getting in the faces of guys at Oklahoma State. Right. When, he was a face of Oklahoma State, not Cade Cunningham. And right. As much as I love Marcus, I probably would do the same deal. Robert Williams is a young unicorn in many respects. Guys that big, that long, that athletic, you start canvassing the NBA landscape, you don't see them. And to have him in a situation where you have him under a controlled contract that even when it comes time to do an extension, he's not going to demand John Collins kind of money. Yet his impact could be comparable, not statistically, but in terms of impact, as much, right, if not greater. And then you look at Lonzo Ball. To your point, $20 million a year for Lonzo. If you think about $20 million a year for him at the age he's at now, $20 million or so a year for Marcus Smart where he's at, it becomes pretty clear that Lonzo is probably the safer bet going forward. Now, am I going to cringe with if that deal went down? Absolutely. Because my fear with Marcus Smart, and I think part of this is in the back of Danny's mind, is you may very well be looking at Tony Allen 2.0. And that is when they didn't meet Tony Allen's financial demands and what he wanted to do money-wise, he left. Not only did he leave and create more opportunities for himself, he became a movement in Memphis. Right. I mean, that franchise has
That's
been
fair.
forever changed since once he arrived there. And I get this feeling that if Marcus Smart is paired with a Brandon Ingram, a Zion Williamson, you got the young big from Texas at the center spot,
Right.
and you start going down the list of really good players, you add an elite defender on the wing to that mix who is going to have a domino effect on those other guys playing a little bit harder than they probably do right now. All of a sudden, you've got a team out west that isn't just going to be pretty good. You got a team out west that's going to be competing at the top of the food chain. For Marcus Smart, it would mean a greater, more enhanced role and certainly more money. And for the Celtics, as much as I think Lonzo can help them, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to give them the impact that Smart does. And again, I don't think him and Marcus, I think, are very different players. But I always come back to impact. And I'm not sold on him elevating his play to where he can be comparable from an impact standpoint, which means Tatum, Brown, Kimbo, Robert, one of those guys is going to have to take their game to an even higher level. So
Right.
those are my big concerns about doing that deal. But I hate
I
to agree
think,
with you
don't
on that
you?
one, Sam, but I do.
I know, man. I was gonna say though, you got me thinking. The Tony Allen comp is really interesting, and I got to be a little careful to not think in my mind that Marcus is older than he is. And this guy's in the prime. I just cheated and looked at my phone real quick. He's 27 years old.
Right.
You know, and I mean, you're potentially, parting ways.
Your best years.
Smart
Yep.
in his prime. Now the tricky part is I'm a sucker for the human component, the locker room stuff and all that. And it's like you also have a fair amount of baggage, and I'm not saying that only in a negative way, but just history
Yeah.
with Marcus and this environment. And he is so competitive. I think sometimes what you see is if guys who are that competitive, are kind of giving it their all every day of the week, and it's not going where they want it to go, after 2, 3, 4 years, can you keep that connectivity together, and can you avoid having the kind of darkness over that group that sometimes kind of leads teams to get derailed, and that's stuff that only Marcus knows. But I mean, I was in the bubble during the playoffs and covered real closely, when he wasn't happy about things after that one playoff game and had the locker room blow up. And, he is a dude who runs hot, and I think 80-90% of the time it's for the betterment of the team. And then other times it's too much. And, that's where we're never going to really know kind of how that's looking internally right now, unless you give Jason and Jalen and Brad and Danny and all them some truth serum and have them tell you. But, you could be right. I mean, the Tony Allen 2.0 thing is really fascinating.
Yeah. I wish I would have thought of this before. Like a round robin between Tony Allen and Marcus Smart. Who wins that head to head? But we'll save that for another day.
Hey, I got to jump in with this before we move on. This is not on topic, but I assume you saw the Tony Allen, Draymond Green back and forth today?
I heard about it. Yeah.
I just love it. If the listeners and the viewers didn't see it, Draymond Green declared himself the best defender in the history of the NBA. Tony Allen jumped in and said, he's calling cap on it and says, who stamped you? And then Draymond hits him with, I was waiting on you to stamp me, but we used you in that one playoff series en route to my first championship. And so, it is what it is. But that kind of back and forth, you got to love social media sometimes. That's back in the old days, Sherrod, we didn't get this.
No, we didn't. But I will say this, though. When the late Kobe Bryant is asked who was the best defender on you, and he says Tony Allen without hesitation.
Yeah.
Sorry, Draymond, you're a great defender. But when the Black Mamba is giving Tony Allen that stamp of approval, I kind of got to lean towards Tony on that.
First team all defense.
Exactly. We got one more game for you. And this one is called Fill the Lane. And it's basically, I will give you a statement and you will fill in the blank within that because you're filling the lane. Okay? Here we go. Blank really needs to get a deal done at the trade deadline if they are truly going to be one of the last teams standing.
I promise you, I'm not saying this because I'm on a Celtics spot. I think the answer is Boston. Like I thought about this and I'm thinking the Clippers come to mind. So maybe they're a close second. They feel pretty good about their group. I don't know if I believe them, but they claim they feel really good about their group, and and that the bubble had all kinds of negative impacts on their chemistry. The rest of the story. Montrezl Harrell out.
Right.
Serge Ibaka in, guys like that. Nicholas Batum's been really good. So they've kind of made their moves. And if I thought about picking them, but it's like they've made their moves, and now they're being patient to see if they pay off. I don't think they're going to get in on Kyle Lowry. Maybe they get a playmaker, a George Hill, somebody like
Right.
that. But with Boston, it just feels like everything is getting ratcheted up right now. I mean, Brad Stevens is having to face questions about going to Indiana. Well, that wouldn't be happening if they were, winning at a 70 or 80% clip. Danny, you hear stuff. Danny is just widely known as like Mr. Cool as a cucumber, right? Like nothing phases him, just kind of, making his way through life. And now for the first time, you hear little kind of stories about, Danny's a little tight, and he knows how important this time is. So, I don't know what the exact stakes are if they don't make a move that helps, but you got two all-stars who are a couple years away from free agency, in I think 2024 and 2025, and Brown and Tatum. And it's a lot. And you can't have the momentum go, if you need to take a pause to rebuild a little bit on the fly and then get back in the game, fine. But if you regress, then too much, then you have all these talented, players that you've been able to get your hands on. You've got those guys wanting out, wanting other situations. And so I do think there's a lot of pressure on Boston to get something done.
Yeah. And I my first thought was to look at a team like Utah, who has a lot of pieces that I love, but they seem to kind of hit this little dip. And I don't know whether it's just a blip in the road or whether it's just, flaws within their structure that are being exposed. But to your point, Boston is the eighth. Are they the eighth best team in the Eastern Conference? Their record says they are, but
Right.
their
Right.
roster and their players make you feel no, they're not that bad. And I think Danny, he's got to figure out what kind of stimulus package can I put together to get this team back revved up, get my basketball economy going.
It
And
better be more than $2,200, Sherrod.
exactly. Because if we're talking $2,200, we have nothing done, nothing accomplished. But I think he's trying to figure that out. And that trade player exception is, again, it's the big chunk out there. But man, my gut just keeps coming back to Danny doesn't do anything this time of year. And when we look back at the Isaiah Thomas deal back in 2015, which was the last significant move he made at the deadline, I remember being in out west with Danny talking about 90 minutes before the deadline, and they didn't have anything done. And then literally within the last hour, Ryan McDonough, former assistant GM at the Celtics, who at the time was the GM of the Suns, decided to relent and give up Isaiah Thomas for I think it was a future first round pick that turned out to be the kid from Kentucky.
Scally BCA.
Yeah, him, and also Marcus Thornton, who was just kind of basically, kind of got the easy pass through Boston, where he just came in, stopped for a second, and was moved on to Phoenix. And that was a deal that Danny didn't feel all that great about getting done because it happened at the last hour. So I get the sense that if they're going to get a deal done, it's going to kind of go down like that, where Danny is going to just pretty much figure this is just going to be another year. And then the Hawks are going to say, okay, we'll take that future first round pick this year and 2 years from now and the trade exception, and we'll give you John Collins. Or it'll be something that will be a pleasant surprise that the Celtics were hoping would happen, but weren't all that comfortable and confident would happen. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting.
Along those lines, I agree with you for sure. And this is shameless self-promotion, but you made me think of a story I wrote last year. And to your point about deals happening at the last minute, it's one of my favorite stories I've done during trade deadline season. I talked to 3 executives on the record just about kind of their most memorable moments this time of year. Well, one of them was Mike Zarin of the Celtics. And Mike, if you go back and read that story, he tells all kinds of stories about, I think he talks about the Isaiah Thomas trade and all these other deals that come together at the very last minute. I mean, you're talking buzzer beaters where they're hoping the NBA lets him in 5 seconds late type of stuff. So,
Right.
that's the stuff. As much as we cover this real closely, we still don't get that on the other side here. The boards are up. They got all the scenarios charted out. They're working through 50 different things and then, trying to figure out what's going to advance your franchise. And so for sure, I think Thursday is going to be a busy day.
Yes, absolutely. And along that whole self-promotion thing, Sam, we are shameless with our guests when it comes to self-promotion. So if there's anything you want to promote, by all means, go at it. Because
Thank you, my friend.
we have absolutely no hesitations or reservations about doing that.
Appreciate you.
So Sam Amick, senior NBA writer with The Athletic. Check out his stuff. Great content as far as the trade deadline and beyond with different NBA topics and subjects that he's covered. A longtime veteran NBA reporter. We go way back to when I was in Detroit. He was in Sacramento. Different kind of Kings team that you covered back then. Certainly different Pistons team that I see out there now.
Sure.
We both kind of grown up a little bit. So.
We have, man. You look good, though. Happy for you. Keep doing your thing. Thanks for having me, Sherrod.
No problem. Thank you, Sam. Sam Amick, senior NBA writer with The Athletic. Thanks so much for your time, my friend.
Thank you, brother.